You already notice more than you think you do. You just haven't learned to trust it yet. Every person you meet is showing you two things at once: who they're trying to be and who they actually are. Most of us only listen to the first one. We take people's words, their tone, their confidence, at face value. But words are the least honest thing about a person, because words are chosen. What isn't chosen, the pause, the flinch, the joke that lands a half second too fast, that's where the real information lives. This isn't a trick. It's not about reading minds or manipulating people. It's about paying attention to the gap between what someone is performing and what they're protecting. Once you see that gap, you can't stop seeing it. And by the end of this, you'll probably notice it in yourself too. Let's start building the framework. 1. Everyone is managing an impression, not just presenting a fact. When someone tells you who they are, they're not lying. They're editing. Every person has a version of themselves they've decided is safe to show. That's not fake. It's just incomplete. The real signal isn't in the edited version. It's in what makes the editing slip. 2. What irritates someone is often a mirror, not a judgment. Pay attention to what a person can't stand in other people. The friend who's obsessed with calling out fake people is often terrified of being seen as fake. The coworker who can't stop criticizing attention seekers often wants attention and hates that they want it. We're harshest about the traits we haven't made peace with in ourselves. 3. Silence carries more data than speech. Watch what happens right before someone answers a hard question. The half-second hesitation, the subject change, the joke used as an exit. None of that is random. It's a person deciding, in real time, how much truth is safe to hand you. The topics people root around tell you more than the topics they discuss freely. 4. Loud virtue is often a cover charge. Be a little skeptical of the person who never misses a chance to announce how honest, humble, or good they are. Real character doesn't need a press release. When someone performs virtue constantly, it's often because some part of them doesn't fully believe it yet, and the performance is meant to convince an audience of one. 5. Most self-deception isn't dishonesty, it's survival. When someone says, "I'm totally fine," in a voice that doesn't match their face, they're probably not lying to you. They're repeating something they've told themselves so often, it's started to feel true. That's not manipulation. That's a coping mechanism working exactly as designed. Once you see it that way, you stop taking the inconsistency personally and start seeing it as information. 6. Superiority is usually insurance against a feared inferiority. The person who needs you to know how much they've accomplished, how right they usually are, how little they need anyone. That person is rarely as secure as the performance suggests. Real confidence doesn't need a witness. When you meet someone who has to keep proving it, look for what they're afraid you'll notice if they stop. None of this is about catching people in a lie. It's about realizing that almost nobody is lying to you on purpose. They're just showing you the parts of themselves they've learned are survivable. The compassionate move isn't to expose the mask. It's to notice it and treat the person underneath a little more gently because of what you now understand. If any of this landed, stay with me, because part 2 is where the mask actually starts to crack, and that's where things get interesting. Part 2. The cracks. In part 1, we talked about the mask, the version of themselves everyone builds to get through the world safely. Now we go further. What happens when that mask is under pressure? Because a mask under pressure doesn't stay still. It moves, and the way it moves tells you everything. 7. Almost every strong reaction is fear wearing a different outfit, over-explaining, dominating a conversation, going quiet and disappearing for days, saying yes when they clearly want to say no. These don't look like fear on the surface, but underneath, they usually are. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being a burden, fear of conflict, fear of being forgotten. Instead of asking, "Why is this person acting this way?" try asking, "What does this person seem afraid of losing right now?" It's a better question, and it almost always gets a more honest answer. 8. Repetitive criticism is often a confession in disguise. When someone keeps returning to the same complaint about other people, everyone's so fake, people are so lazy, nobody's honest anymore, it's worth asking what part of that they're actually wrestling with in themselves. Not always, but often enough that it's worth checking before you take the criticism at face value. 9. Chronic confidence sometimes guards old guilt. Some people perform certainty like it's armor, always composed, always right, never rattled. If you watch closely though, you'll catch the tell. Over-preparation, a flash of defensiveness when questioned, a need to win even small disagreements. That's rarely about the current moment. It's often about something in the past they haven't resolved, and the confidence is the wall they built around it. 10. Absolute statements often hide the opposite feeling. I genuinely don't care what people think. I'm always fine. Nothing bothers me. Total statements like these are rarely just descriptions. They're often reassurances the person is giving themselves out loud. The intensity of the claim is frequently proportional to how much work it's doing to keep a doubt quiet. 11. The need for control often mirrors internal disorder. People who need everything planned, managed, predictable, who struggle badly with last-minute change, aren't usually control freaks by nature. Often, something in their internal world feels unstable, so the external world gets micromanaged to compensate. The tighter someone grips their environment, the more worth asking what happens if they let go. 12. Non-stop performance is often loneliness in a costume. This one's everywhere now. The constant posting, the curated highlight reel, the need to be seen doing well. It's easy to read as vanity, but often it's the opposite. A quiet fear of being irrelevant if the performance ever stops. People who are genuinely at peace with themselves don't need an audience to confirm it. By now, you're probably starting to notice this isn't really about figuring people out. It's about realizing that most people are more afraid and more fragile than their behavior lets on, and that changes how you respond to them. Not weaker, steadier. There's one more layer, though, the deepest one. In part 3, we get into where all of this actually comes from and how to read it without becoming cynical. Stay with me. Part 3, the root. We've covered the mask, and we've covered the cracks. This last part is about the foundation underneath both, because behavior doesn't come from nowhere. Every pattern you've ever noticed in someone has an origin. Most people are simply repeating an old survival strategy in a new context, and they don't fully know they're doing it. 13. People argue from wounds and justify with logic. When someone insists, "I don't believe in commitment," it's unrealistic. That's rarely a neutral opinion. It's usually a conclusion built backward from something painful, then dressed up in reasoning afterward. If you want to understand someone's strongest opinions, don't just ask what they believe. Ask what experience might have taught them to believe it. It reframes disagreement into something far less personal. 14. How someone treats the powerless tells you who they are. Anyone can be respectful to people who matter to their status. The real signal is how someone treats a person who can't offer them anything back. A service worker, a junior colleague, someone clearly struggling. Restraint and generosity in that moment say more about someone's actual character than any accomplishment they list on a resume. 15. The hunger to be noticed is often a fear of being erased. Some people need to be the center of every room. It's tempting to write that off as ego, but very often it's closer to a quiet panic about being forgettable, a leftover from some point in life where being unseen felt dangerous or painful. The behavior looks like confidence. It usually isn't. 16. What someone attacks, they sometimes secretly admire. This one's uncomfortable, but useful. People rarely go out of their way to tear down something they feel neutral about. When someone repeatedly mocks a trait they clearly don't have, freedom, confidence, success, ease, sometimes it's not because they think it's fake. It's because it reminds them of a version of themselves they gave up on somewhere along the way. 17. Adult behavior often replays childhood roles. The person who never asked for help learned somewhere that asking wasn't safe. The person who over-apologizes learned that their needs were an inconvenience. The person who can't sit still with affection learned that closeness came with a cost. People aren't usually choosing these patterns consciously. They're repeating the conditions that once kept them safe in situations where those conditions no longer apply. 18. Patterns are more honest than explanations. People will tell you a story about why they do what they do, but if you watch the pattern instead of listening to the story, you'll usually get closer to the truth. The pattern doesn't lie. It's just harder to hear because it's said in behavior instead of words. Here's the actual point of all 18 of these, and it's simple. None of this is a tool for outsmarting people. It's a way of getting less annoyed, less offended, and less surprised by human behavior. Because once you understand where it's coming from, it stops feeling like an attack and starts looking like a person doing their best with an old, half-broken map. And if any of these 18 hit a little too close to home, that's not an accident either. Reading other people clearly has a strange side effect. Eventually, you start reading yourself the same way.